Good morning, welcome to another video. Today I'm going to try something new. I'm going to do a little walkthrough of my exact thought process as I'm taking my photos. I'm thinking of maybe doing a series on this, so if this works, please let me know in the comments and by giving it a thumbs up or a thumbs down if you think it's rubbish, if you don't want this sort of thing, because I want to be able to express what I'm thinking and what I'm doing in a clear, simple way so that you can copy me if you want to, and you can try and achieve some of your own photos in a similar way. So with that said, let's get started. What do you think of my hat, by the way? My usual one is in the wash. I dropped it in the mud last week, so it's in the laundry basket. So I've had to do a makeshift one now. This is a buff. I don't know if you know what they are. It's kind of a neck thing that you can see through, put around your neck. You can actually turn them into hats. You just take it, do a couple of twists and fold it over, turn it into a rather fetching beanie. Subscribe for more terrible fashion tips. Anyway, better carry on. Right, this is take number 2. I've already filmed this whole bit, but it is so cold this morning that my wireless Rode mic has gone completely flat. It's drained the battery so quick. On the car this morning it said it was -8 and batteries do not last long. In fact, the batteries go flat on my camera now as well. I've got a spare, but it's just the cold weather will sap your batteries from everything. Even my video camera is getting pretty close, so let's get straight down to business. We've got this beautiful backlit tree here. This golden hour light's just catch it early and completely frozen grass leading up to it in the foreground. It's a very, very simple composition, and that's exactly what I'm going for, because at the edges it could be quite messy if you're not careful. It's surrounded by other trees, so I want to make my subject really stand out in this situation. So I'm going to do that in a few ways. I'm using my nifty 50, the 50-1.8, so that I've got options of different apertures. I can open this quite wide. I'm going to do a few different apertures. First I'm going to take it at f2.8. So because we've got that wide aperture, the foreground will be blurred out and the subject will be sharp. That simplifies the image. But I'm also going to do it at f11. I quite often do this, take a few different shots at different apertures so I've got options when I get home. Now you'll also notice that it takes 3 frames. That's because I've got it set to exposure bracket. So if you don't know what that is, the camera takes 3 photos, one that's too bright, too dark, and then one that's correctly exposed. That means that you're not going to have any highlights blown out or shadows that are too dark. In a high dynamic scene like this, where there's a bright sun, dark shadows, especially with a crop sensor camera, because you've got a smaller sensor, there's a less dynamic range, so it can't pick up as much highlights and shadows as cameras with bigger sensors. So by doing exposure bracketing, we can blend those 3 together, and we can have this backlit tree in sharp detail without losing anything in the shadows or the highlights, or losing less anyway. In a situation like this, there will always be one blown out or clipped. So you'll notice that the height of my tripod is important in this situation as well. I want to catch enough of the foreground for it to blur out, but not so much that it distracts from the subject. So having it at this height means that the subject is in a good eye line and you just catch a bit of that foreground as well. Around about the height of a person. I want this to look like it's from a human perspective, as I do with a lot of my photos, hence why I'll quite often use a wide aperture. Unusual for landscape photographers, but that's sort of my unique style, that is. Making it look like it's through a human eye is quite important to me, and in the storytelling of my photos too. So now, let's get this picture back into Lightroom, and let's talk through my editing process. So here we are back in Lightroom with this image. I'm going to show you how you can go from this to this in just a few easy steps. And I've already merged the 3 exposures. So if you want to know how to do that, there's another video on my channel that explains how to do that. And we've got a great image. Doesn't look like it needs a lot of editing, this photo. If you take a good exposure in camera, even the raw files will look good sometimes. But because I want to make it mine, I'm still going to edit it. There's a few things I want to change that aren't quite right in my eye. So first thing I'm going to do is crop the image because I want to know exactly what I'm working with. So I think I'm going to go with a 4x5 for this. There's too much foreground in the bottom if we leave it as a 16:9. Not a 16:9, sorry, a 2x3. So a 4x5 crop. You see this mess on the edge here? We've got a sort of tree that was just catching the sun, a bit too much there, so I want to crop that out. We've got plenty of megapixels to work with, so get a bit more. Raise it up just ever so slightly. There we go. I'm trying to get an even gap on each side of the tree-ish. Let's say about there. I think that's probably right. So now we've got our full image that we want to work with. Gonna just heel spot this bit on the edge here because we don't want that distraction on the edge of our frame. So now we've got our picture to work with. Next thing I want to do is perhaps just adjust the white balance a little bit just because it's very warm. I mean, I think it's pretty accurate, but we just want to cool it down ever so slightly just to give it that colder feel. Don't overdo this bit. Yep. That's nice. So now I'm going to do what I usually do and add a preset to work from, just as sort of a base to work from. Ooh, that's far too yellow, that one. I've got to adjust that. Filmic, no. Go through. It could work as a black and white image, but I still want to keep some of the colour because that sun was lovely and the blue of the sky really contrasts with it. So maybe down to, oh yeah, I like that. This one gives it a bit of a soft feel. Let's go with that one, glow. Now, as you can see, that's really made the yellows pop. There's too much yellow in that now. Let's just make a few small adjustments. I'm going to raise the shadows a bit more just because we don't want it too dark in that tree. We want some details still there. Raise up to about 10, maybe 15. Now, those yellows, as you can see, they're really intense, so I'm going to reduce the saturation right down. Say sort of 80. Because we really want the white of the ice to pop out. Because it was all catching the sunlight, it was very, very yellow, which makes it not feel as cold. So if we reduce those yellows, it makes for a much colder looking scene. Now, when it comes to color grading, I'm just going to give the shadows an ever so slight blue. Let's go with 180, so it's exactly where we want it in the blue, and maybe a saturation of 20. Too much. Starts looking natural. 15. That's better. So by making those shadows look ever so slightly blue, it makes that cold feeling even more intense. I'm happy with the other colours. Everything looks nice. It's almost monochromatic now, with the blue and the yellow. I'm happy with the texture and the clarity because I've reduced them, as you can see in this preset. That's what gives it this soft glow sort of feeling and really captures the mist. Just ever so slight vignette there. I like that. That looks good so far. In fact, we could leave it at that point. It would be a nice picture. But now with masking, I can add my own sort of elements to it. The thing that makes it stand out as one of my photos that people could recognize. So first thing I'm going to do is a bit of sun glow with masking. From the direction of the sun, just draw a circle. Just make it a perfect circle by holding down Shift. Just onto the subject a bit, feather it right down. I start by using a bit of dehaze to -50. We'll warm the temperature up a little bit, maybe a bit more. No, too much. Let's go with that. We'll reduce the contrast, raise the blacks a little bit, and then add a bit of colour just to this section. Now, once again, we don't want it looking over the top. Remember, we reduce those yellows, so now we can choose what colour the sun is that glows on. So let's just give it a ever so slight orange glow, not too much. There we are. Just going to reduce the exposure a little bit just so it's not like a blown out highlight. It makes it as if the light is coming through fog then, and reduce the whites a little bit more. And there we are. Just a few fine adjustments. Might just need to go a little bit higher up, more direction of the sun. There we are. You've got that glow from the sun on the side of the tree. I want to make that tree really pop and stand out, so if I use the subject tool, it would probably pick up the tree, but it would be quite messy and it would struggle the AI to pick up that. So in that situation, if you want to make that sort of subject stand out, just draw a circle from the center of your subject, feather it right down, and now we can add a bit of sharpness. Let's say 40, ever so slight bit of contrast, 20, and just like raise the texture and clarity just ever so slightly. If you use them too much, it'll really make it an ugly picture. But now the eye is drawn to the center of the image of the subject. Once again, that's part of simplifying this image, is drawing the viewer's eye to the subject. That brings me on to the next part of this. Now this foreground, I like it, but it's slightly distracting from the subject. So there's a few ways you can adjust this. The first thing I'm going to do, now this is taken at f11, so the foreground is quite sharp. The reason I use this one rather than the f2.8 is because the f2.8 picture, this one was at f2.8, and when you zoom in on the subject wasn't quite sharp. I don't know why exactly that is. It looks like it was ever so slight camera movement, even though there was no wind or anything. I don't know, maybe I touched the camera or something. But the F11, in the F11 one, the subject is much, much more sharp, so that's why I want to use this. But I still want to blur out that foreground. So what we can do, if we had a linear gradient from the bottom, there, we can just cheat. You see there is sharpness slide. If we reduce that down, as you can see, that's properly blurred out that foreground, as if we'd taken it with a wider aperture. I'm just going to add another ever so slight one here, just to really do it there. There we can get that sort of almost full frame look with the amount of blur we've got in the foreground. That won't be to everyone's taste, and that's absolutely fine. That's the good thing about photography, is that it's subjective. A lot of people would much prefer a sharp foreground. For me personally, this adds to it feeling like it's through a human's eye. This is somebody looking at the subject over the foreground. They're not concentrating on the foreground, so it's blurred out. They're concentrating on the subject. Now it's very dark in the bottom there, so I want to kind of even that out. I want a dark foreground, but in a sort of even manner, so I'll show you how to do that now. Add another linear gradient. I like to do all these separately rather than doing it all on the same one. Gives you much more control. Reduce the contrast right down. Raise the shadows right up. Highlights right down. Now that looks ugly, so what we could do now is, if we reduce the exposure, because it's much more even, we've got a nice dark foreground without it being too distracting. Raise it up ever so slightly, there we go. And spread it out a bit more so it's not as intense. Again, this would be fine to finish with. I'm going to add one more element. You see we've got ever so slightly blue bit up in the sky here. That's a lovely contrast to the yellow of the sun. So I'm going to add one more linear gradient just up in this top corner. Not too much. Once again, when you're using the colorize tool, you want to make sure that you don't overdo this at all. So because we can add a little bit of blue to this, ever so slight, just really makes that blue sky pop. And there we have our final image. So this is the before, really yellow and intense. The foreground is distracting. The subject is sharp, but almost too sharp, as if it's taken with an iPhone. Whereas if we just soften the image a bit and add a few masks, reduce the color a little bit so it's almost black and white, you get a lovely sort of artistic image that looks like it's taken through the eye of a human. I hope that makes sense, and I hope you've enjoyed being able to see my thought process with this. Like I said at the beginning, if you've liked this video, then let me know, because I'm thinking about turning this into a series where I share my exact thoughts on how I get an image, how I make an image, so that you can try and copy me if you want to. If you do want me to make it a series, let me know in the comments, and by using the thumbs up and thumbs down, so that I know my audience's reaction to this. Because sometimes a video can get a lot of views, but you've got no idea how people react. Whereas if a lot of people get involved, then I can know. Now, of course, editing images can be quite an intimidating thing, especially if you're a beginner. So in this video here, I explain how you can use just one type of mask to really make your images pop. I'll see you next time.